About 4 weeks ago at an aerodrome somewhere in England.
Your aircraft is ready, Mr. Churchill.
And at Miami, Florida.
Your airplane is ready to take off, Mr. President.
And thus President Roosevelt and Prime Minister Winston Churchill set off for the Casablanca Conference, the unconditional surrender meeting which thrilled free men of the world, sent shivers up this Axis spine. Tonight on We the People, you're going to hear an American who was there and who has a unique story of that historic meeting. He's international news photo ace cameraman Sammy Schulman, who landed with the Yanks in North Africa and shared the danger while they cracked an enemy fortress near the beach. Sammy, how long have you been back?
I've just been here a couple of days after the most exciting assignment in my life. I was in Casablanca at the time the president arrived, but I didn't hear about it right away. I can tell you it certainly was a well-kept secret, even for Morocco. I was summoned by an Army public relations officer and told to get ready for an all-day outing. At 9 in the morning, I was put on a truck with a bunch of Army photographers and told that President Roosevelt was already in the city and was going to review American troops nearby. The president, I repeated? How in the world and what in the world? I was so shocked, all I could think of was the bum gag of Mrs. Roosevelt traveling here. And they must mean Mrs. Roosevelt, not the president. But the officers assured me it was the commander-in-chief himself, and there I was, the only civilian photographer at the festivities. Now, it had been my good fortune to know the president through my many previous assignments here in the United States. So I was sort of anxious to see whether he'd notice me as our truck joined the presidential motorcade. Well, the president drove up in his car and transferred from that into an Army Peep. Just before the Peep drove down past the line of troops, FDR looked around and waved and said, "Hi, Sammy." He'd been cordial like that ever since I first knew him as governor of New York State.
Well, how did the review go?
The soldiers had been lined up for miles, completely ignorant of Mr. Roosevelt's presence in Africa. Before the review, they'd been beefing like they always do. They were saying to one another, "Well, I hope the colonels and the generals get a bang out of seeing me all prettied up for 'em again this morning." Each battalion had its colors out, and the bands played the national anthem. Then, as the presidential Peep went down the line, the band opened up with "Hail to the Chief." Man, oh man, you should have seen those rows of shining white teeth and those smiling American faces as they saw FDR. That's really when the fellows felt good. And as soon as the president had gone on, the command of "At ease" was given, I heard the fellows talking excitedly. "Holy cow," one would say, "that was the big gun himself. Gee whiz, the president, he came all the way over here?" And I was mighty proud when I heard one big fighting man say to another, "If the president can come this far, busy as he is, I guess we can go a lot further." Shortly after that, I discovered the American soldier of this war is the same determined souvenir hunter that his daddy was in 1917.
How's that, Sammy?
Well, right after the review, the president had lunch in the field. Mess kits were placed on field tables, and I hustled over to see what went on. There were about 30 or more soldiers presented to the president because they'd been decorated for bravery. Well, with all the excitement, practically nobody could eat the lunch, and the first thing you know, I saw the mess sergeant taking the president's mess kit and was snitching at a souvenir. When that word got around, sure as my name's Sammy, that was almost the second battle of Casablanca. Of course, by this time, the president's gone. And if he's listening in now, I can tell him for the first time, later the commanding officer of that regiment took that mess kit and had it engraved as a keepsake for the whole outfit.
What were you doing all this time?
I was taking pictures. I represented International News Photos, Associated Press, Acme News Pictures, and Life magazine. As we took snaps, President Roosevelt and the Prime Minister were talking to each other. The President would say something, and then Mr. Churchill would nod agreement and add ideas of his own. During the press conference, President Roosevelt did the talking, and you could see what Prime Minister Churchill means when he speaks of being President Roosevelt's very earnest lieutenant.
Well, Sammy, did you get to meet Prime Minister Churchill?
I certainly did. The President of the United States introduced me, and by George, he gave me a nice introduction. He said something to the effect that I had been along photographing him on a great many trips for years now. Mr. Churchill seemed very interested, and smiled as he puffed that big cigar he wears almost constantly. The following day, the conferences were over, and the President left. As we stood there watching him get into his car, I was talking to a British captain, the fellow who had served as photographer on many a tough commando raid. The president's car rolled out of sight, and this chap leaned over and said to me, "Sammy, I've had everything in the world happen to me except to go sleigh riding on a June day with Adolf Hitler. And this conference between Mr. Churchill and President Roosevelt is the most exciting thing I've ever experienced. What a tonic for the Allies. And believe me, that goes double for Sammy."